Welcome, everybody, to another Perceptive podcast here on Game Wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games. I am, of course, Josh Placer, and we have another great developer interview lined up today. And for those of you watching this live, thanks for tuning in. My guest is the lead developer of the game Nox Archaist, which was conceived and designed as a love letter to old school CRPG design. It had a successful Kickstarter, and as of this week, it is officially released. So please welcome from 6502 Workshop, Mark Lemert. How are you doing, Mark?
Good, Josh. Thanks for having me on, and hello, everyone. Thanks for tuning in.
Yep.
Look forward to talking to you all today.
Yep, it's great to have you back on. For those of you watching this live or recorded, we did a record interview with Mark. I think this was like early 2020 or maybe late 2019. I think it was like right around the time of the Kickstarter. And since then, I know a lot has been done. And like we just said a minute ago, the game has been officially released. So congratulations to you and the rest of your team there.
Thank you. We really appreciate that.
So for tonight, we're going to be discussing kind of a post-mortem on the development of Nox Archaist, things you and your team have learned. And for the chat watching us live or recorded, if you have any questions for Mark about CRPG design, about Nox Archaist, feel free to leave them in the comments and we will get to them as they come in. So, to get things started with, Mark, for people tuning in live or recorded who miss our previous cast or don't know what Nox Archaist is, could you talk a little bit about your background and kind of give us, like the elevator pitch of what the game is?
Sure, sure. So I started developing Nox Archaist about 5 years ago, and I grew up in the '80s playing 8-bit role-playing games like Ultima and Bard's Tale, Wizardry on an Apple II computer. And that was the computer that we had in the house. And pretty much ever since I was a kid in the 1980s, I wanted to create an 8-bit role-playing game specifically on the Apple II platform. And about 5 years ago, I set out to make that happen. And it's worked out to come to fruition here, and was released just a few days ago on December 12th. And what it is Nox Archaist is an 8-bit role-playing game for the Apple II, Windows, and Mac. So you don't actually have to have a Apple II computer to play it. On Windows and Mac, we have you actually don't even technically need to download a Apple II emulator on Windows or Mac. The game is bundled with what we call the Nox app, which is basically just a standard application you click on to launch the game. There's an Apple II emulator under the hood, so it's a authentic experience, but without the hassle of actually setting up an emulator. So I guess the only other thing that I would add, more on the gameplay side, is we pick up where games like Ultima and Bard's Tale left off on the Apple II, and introduce many enhancements such as full screen map view, pop-up windows, a skill-based system, multi-tile monsters, cool special effects, spell effects, and a brief in-game tutorial for players who want to dive right into the action rather than read the wonderful 125-page full color cover manual that we have in the box sets. And I can show some more of the box sets later.
Cool. And like you said, as we talked about on our first cast, like Nox Archaist is definitely billed as that love letter to old school RPG design, especially for the Apple II, for that kind of like specific period of game development.
Yes, absolutely. It's going to reflect the old school gameplay style of Apple II RPGs. Anybody who's played any Apple II RPG is going to feel right at home, or probably even any 8-bit RPG on other platforms as well. And at the same time, we also incorporated some modern sensibilities into the game, so that some people, when they go back and play an 8-bit RPG that they loved as a kid, find that their memories are more positive than the reality of the experience when judged against some of the conveniences we've gotten used to in modern gameplay. So we tried to strike a balance between, the old school gameplay, the modern sensibilities, while at the same time working within the constraints of the platform itself, which really brings out when you're working in 128K of RAM and 180K floppy disks, of which we use 8 disk sides. You really have to focus on story and good mechanics and things like that in order to really create an engaging game and those kinds of limitations. But some of the modern sensibilities are things like a menu-driven inventory and character management system, and a full tactical combat option, like people who played Ultima would be very familiar with. That's there and enhanced as well, but also a quick combat option for dispatching low-level mobs to minimize grinding, because we understand, we're not, all 10, 15 years old now. We have other responsibilities and sometimes need to just kind of speed things along. So that's there. Within combat itself, if anyone remembers playing tactical combat in the old games, a lot of times you'd end up just being able to attack along cardinal directions, attack north, south, east, and west. That could get kind of tedious. So we have a tab-driven target selector in combat. So if you've got a ranged weapon, you got all the the mobs up there on the screen. You can just tab between them for which ones you're going to fire at all the different angles. I think I mentioned the in-game tutorial before, but another modern sensibility also combines with a really nice sort of old school homage in the game, which is Lord British is an NPC, and he plays a non-trivial role in the game. It's not just a cameo. And one of the things that he does is optionally he will give the player advice on along the quest, essentially kind of operating like a hint book, if you will. It's possible to play the game and win the game without ever getting that kind of advice from Lord British, but for those that want to kind of move things along, encounter some challenging puzzles, and there's many challenging puzzles in the game. There is that option to go get a hint from Lord British.
Yeah. It sounds really great, and like you said, a big point about Nox Archaist is that while it is still designed, obviously for the Apple II software, Apple II hardware, and that kind of gameplay sensibilities, a big portion of this game was, of course, trying to modernize the design so that somebody who didn't grow up playing those games can still get into this. I remember, I think, on our previous discussion, you talked about kind of some of that challenges of, trying to keep to that old school, but at the same time making sure that this game can still be approachable for modern audiences.
Absolutely. It was a challenge throughout various stages of the project as we contemplated on, just for example, things like the full screen view or nearly full screen view versus the 8-bit games of the day, at least at the Apple II, but I think across platforms as well. It was typically kind of a small view box in the upper left-hand corner of the screen, and you'd have kind of your stats, your character roster off on the right side, and maybe a text scrolling window in the lower right, things like that. And one of the reasons that the games were designed that way in the 1980s was that it's a lot less CPU intensive if your graphics scrolling on the map itself is only happening in a small space on the screen. So when we thought about, hey, it would be really nice to have this widescreen, almost full screen kind of a map view, and then have pop-up windows, the modern sensibility there. People, we're all used to pop-up windows now to present things like the character roster and inventory and casting spells selector, character, things like that. We had to think, okay, this wasn't done in the 1980s. Why wasn't it done? Was it simply because pop-up windows weren't, really conceived yet in any kind of significant way, other than maybe in Xerox PARC? or was it, like I said, there's a significant resource benefit to designing the screen the way that it was done. in the 80s, where the map was just a small view in the kind of the upper left hand corner. So it was kind of like, well, can we actually do it? What are we going to run into a technological roadblock that prevents us from doing it? We didn't know, and so we had to do a lot of experimentation, take some risks, that may or may not lead to a dead end. And okay, well, there went 2 months of work, kind of thing. So those were really, really tricky decisions, because while on one hand, this was a project that we loved doing and didn't have a particular time frame on it, at the same time, we did want to get it out sometime, this century. So those were still difficult decisions, and it actually worked out pretty well. In hindsight, I think we managed to avoid some of the biggest landmines we could have stepped into. And there were a few setbacks here and there, but ultimately, I think we made some really good, solid decisions, and as a result, achieved some of those modern sensibility improvements mentioned before, and they've worked out really well.
Mm-hmm. And for the people watching us right now, just to clarify for anyone new tuning in, that when we say this game was built for the Apple II, that is literal. You actually use the hardware, you use the programming tools and such in terms of building this game on.
Absolutely, and you just reminded me that I actually have the Apple II sitting right here. And let's just turn this thing on. This is an old CRT television. We'll get the sound on here.
Let me know if that's any better, chat, for you to see that. I just adjusted the camera a little bit. Should be good.
Takes a little bit to boot up, as of course any proper 8-bit game does.
Nox Archaist.
So we're going really old school for our chat tonight.
So the song plays for a couple of minutes, but we'll just hit spacebar to continue to the game's main menu. But so just for some context there, the music was coming out of a special Apple II sound card called the Mockingbird. But before that, when the human voice said Nox Archaist, that was actually coming out of the Apple II stock speaker, 1-bit stock speaker. And that has never been done before in a commercial Apple II game, and that was one of a number of really exciting things that we did, because really, as I probably when we last talked, Josh mentioned, one of the core goals of our mission here was to basically see what might have happened if 8-bit RPG development on the Apple II had continued past the end of the 1980s. Obviously, it all switched over for economic reasons. The developers switched over for economic reasons to the IBM PC and the Macintosh. But in a hypothetical universe, what would have happened if those other platforms didn't exist for another 5 or 10 years or something, and it just had kept going? So we endeavored to stand on the shoulders of giants like Richard Garriott and Berger Becky and Robert Woodhead and others, and see, well, was there more of the machine that could get leveraged into doing that next iteration? We all probably remember with Ultima how each Ultima Richard Garriott released was technologically superior to the last. It was the gameplay was pushed ahead in various ways. And then Ultima 5 was the last one on the Apple II, and then Ultima 6 showed up on the PC. Well, could there have been something in between? That was what we wanted to find out. And we succeeded in a variety of ways of demonstrating that, yes, in fact, there was more of the machine to produce another iteration of a tile RPG with further levels of advancement. And the human voicing Nox Archaist at the beginning of the game. That was one of those. And actually on that particular one, I had the honor and privilege of working with Dr. Cat, a former team member of Origin Systems and programmer on Ultima 5. He actually invented the technique that we use. Our team did the actual programming, but Dr. Cat and I got to talking about this a few years ago, and he shared, what he had done and developed with the technique is called 5-bit pulse width modulation. And he had created a prototype that ended up in, I think it was Soft Talk magazine. But this all happened like at 1989, 1990. The industry was winding down, and Origin was basically done shipping games on the Apple II at that point. So it never made it into an actual Apple II game. And so, we got talking about it, and he shared, kind of the details of what he had done. And we thought, well, yeah, this needs to be done on the Apple II in a commercial game. So that's we just heard the end result with the digitized voice there.
Mm-hmm. I guess here's a question for you that I'm curious about. As you and your team were building like Nox Archaist and doing like research, I guess how did you do the research in terms of figuring out what you can and can't do with the Apple II, or trying to learn more about the hardware to build this game on?
Sure. Well, in the beginning, a lot of it was spelunking around. I was spelunking around in old news groups, and piecing together information on how to do things like write a bootloader and boot software up on the Apple II without an operating system, because the operating system takes up way too much memory. You want to write a serious game on the Apple II, you don't have the luxury of having an operating system. You have to write it right on the bare metal, and things like that are things that there are very few people left in the world that actually remember how to do them. And at the start of the project, I didn't know any of those people. So I was literally spelunking around on old news groups. Google groups took over a lot of Usenet, and like CompuServe news groups ended up in Google groups. And so I'm like searching around and finding, dates on some of these posts are, 1991, and things as I'm piecing some of this stuff together. And at the early stage of the project, there's a lot of what was going on. Later on, I eventually got connected with some of the few people that still know the Apple II inside and out, and have a pretty good handle on the capabilities, and of course recruited them to join the development team, and that kind of move things forward from there. But even with their contributions, these are. We're talking about Grandmaster 6502 assembly programmers, but not necessarily, these weren't people that actually had shipped games in the 1980s on the Apple II. So they didn't necessarily really know either exactly, like, could you do a full screen map view, or could you do, those were, concepts that had never really been done. And at this point, I wasn't in contact with people like Dr. Cat, who could have, speculated on, would that have been possible based on, his knowledge of where things left off. So it was really, that'll happen kind of later stages of the project, those kinds of interactions with folks like him. So really, it came down to a lot of experimenting at a certain point of just, let's code a mock-up of, a full screen tile view, or, we've got lightning bolts that streak across the screen when you cast the lightning spell. That never happened in Apple II. RPGs, there were arcade games that would do, kind of some fancy effects like that, but they were never in tile games, and that's because the arcade games and tile games work on two completely different engines, and you got limited resources, and so can you kind of combine the effects both at the same time? So something like that, it was just simply a matter of roll up my sleeves and just experiment, write up some code, try to write a mock-up and get it to work. And in those experiments, sometimes it worked out, sometimes it didn't work out. And like I said, fortunately, I was reasonably conservative about what we attempted to do, such that while there were some things that didn't work out, we didn't lose a huge amount of time to the dead ends, just kind of in the selection process.
Yep. And with kind of like going around and like even with that point for a second, with like so much of the experimentation you and your team did to with Nox Arcade in terms of what you can or what you could and couldn't do with the Apple II, I guess how did you know when it was time to maybe to move on or stop chasing a specific design or a specific functionality with it?
Boy, that's a really abstract. It's a good question, and probably there's a very abstract answer to it, if there really even is one. I developed kind of an intuition, if you will, during the project that was very much relevant in those kinds of decisions, because it's really when you're dealing with 128K and of memory, of RAM, and disk of a very limited size, um, and you're building a game where you haven't built a game like that before on that platform. You run into the situation where you're like, okay, well, how much bigger can I afford to make the combat module? I'm halfway done with the project. How much bigger can I afford to make the combat module? And it's like, well, okay, the answer to that is, well, it depends on how big the other modules are going to be for talking to NPCs or for managing inventory, and both of which are unknowns if you haven't done them yet. So I liken it to it was kind of a game of chess against the Apple II, where the Apple II is bound and determined to checkmate me in terms of building this game engine, and I had the way I dealt with it was I really didn't build modules completely at one time, and I would build a little bit of the inventory module, a little bit of the combat module, a little bit of the NPC dialogue, maybe more than a little bit, significant chunks, but not the whole thing. I'd have some kind of bare bones functionality, and then it would come down to the bells and whistles and the features. And I think that this is going to get back to the original question. So I get the bare bones functionality in with a given module of the game, and then I'd move on to a different module. And as I bounced around between the modules and got the bare bones functionality rolled up, I would then be like observing how much memory have I used, how much disk have I used, how much do I have left, and now, okay, great. Now I've got the bare bones of all the modules. Wow, what a big relief, because at least we got the bare bones. Now let's go back to, say, the combat module, one of the other ones, look at the features that were the nice to haves, and say, okay, well, let's add one or two, see what that takes, and okay, great, those worked out. Now let's go maybe over the NPC dialogue module, look back at the nice to have feature list, add a couple of those, and each time observing how much memory is left, how much disk is left, and then rinse and repeat. So when it came down to a decision of, to your exact question of, when to throw in the towel on pursuing a particular feature, it was very much informed by that broader sort of equation that I just described, where I might be trying to build a prototype of something. Wow, this would be really cool, but I don't know how much memory it's going to take, how much disk it's going to take, and I kind of eye it up and think, yeah, this is plausible. Let's try to build a prototype. But then as the prototype unfolds, if I see that, wow, whoa, this is taking way more disk, way more memory than I thought it was going to, and based on, just sort of where everything else is at in terms of memory and disk consumption across these different modules of the game, this is where I sort of make that kind of eye up the shot judgment call on whether or not to pull the plug, essentially. And I was pretty conservative in doing that. I probably gave up sooner than some of my teammates would have liked, who were a fountain of great ideas, which I very much appreciate them for. But as they will say, only probably 10% of the ideas suggested ever made it into the game, because they had to prove out in terms of feasibility. And I was very, very cognizant of the delay that would happen if in that chess game with the Apple II, if I got checkmated and I used up all the memory or disk on one or two really awesome features, the game would either be broken because some of the core stuff wasn't done, or it'd feel lopsided because, well, yeah, great, there were these one or two really cool things in combat, but now it's bare bones for like everything else. So that was the judgment call that ended up needing to happen. And in the end, whether or not the decisions were right or wrong in terms of what could have ultimately have been done is hard to say. Ultimately, I think that they were sound, at least in the sense that the game got finished, and it's really awesome.
Yep, and that's the interesting challenge, because one of the things that we've spoken about many times here on Game Wisdom is being able to work within the limitations of whether it's the medium, whether it's your own programming, or just your skills, or just the hardware. And for you and your team, you really had hardware limitations to work around. It's not like you could just add extra memory to the Apple II
Absolutely.
and make things work like that.
Exactly. That was not an option, and we did not use any sort of like modern day enhancements for the Apple II either. Which I mean, you can get way more memory in your Apple II now than you were ever able to in the 1980s. But we didn't go there. We're like, no, this is that defeats the whole point. The point is to make a authentic game that could have existed in the 1980s on the technology of the day, and see what it could have been. So we very deliberately made sure that we were operating within those original constraints.
Mm-hmm. A question came in a few minutes ago that I think Chris answered, but I also wanted to ask you about this as well. But Sean Googler asked, I'm sorry I mispronounced your last name there. Did you plan for profit with Nox Archaist, or was it purely a self-funded passion for the game?
Wow, well, that's a great question. I kind of described the project to my family and non-gamer friends as a hobby that kind of got out of hand. So in the early stages of the project, it was pure, I'm just doing this. I'm writing code. I didn't know, when I was like in the early months of the project and making the first, prototype, basically just map engine to put a map up on the screen you could walk around in with nothing else. I really didn't know where it was going. How big was it going to be? Et cetera. So there were definitely points in the very early stage where it was like, okay, well, I'm going to tinker around with this and throw something together, and maybe it'll take 6 months, and here's a free download. I mean, there was a point where that was kind of my mindset on it, and that was before I learned enough to be able to see that there was a way, if I really wanted to invest years of my life into this, there was a way to be able to push the gameplay technology past where it left off. And then it became something different, because I thought, if this is just, going to be another, RPG, okay, great. It's new, it's today and all that. But if it's just another RPG that within, sort of the same kind of gameplay mechanics as existed, that's neat, but that's not something worth, to me, spending 5 years on. It was when I saw I had done enough kind of prototyping. It was when I saw that there was enough of the machine left that hadn't been tapped, that I was like, wow, we could really do something amazing, and dare I say, perhaps even historical within the context of Apple II computing history here. That I thought, this is really worth investing some serious time in. And for a long time, even then, I was still just kind of doing it on spare time, here and there. It really, and then I guess, we get to a point of there was a Kickstarter, and the goal of the Kickstarter was raise some money to fund the production of box sets, and I'll show the physical box set here at some point as well. And that's obviously some raw materials costs there that we needed to cover. So that, well, we'll do a Kickstarter and raise the money for that. So ultimately, there was a point that in order to get the game done, I needed to. I mean, my day job, I guess I should mention that, is I'm a finance and business consultant. I'm actually not a professional programmer, believe it or not. I just play one on YouTube. No, there was a point where I saw that in order to get the game done in a reasonable amount of time, I really needed to focus on it, a lot, and really kind of, take some time off from my consulting. And when it reached kind of that stage in the more later periods, I thought, okay, well, I don't need to make a lot of money on this game. That was never really the goal or the point. But in order to, be able to justify, the prioritization that I saw was really going to be necessary to see it through to its full vision, I thought, well, I really need to plan on doing some marketing at game launch, and just do what's possible, not charge exorbitant rates or anything, but still try to raise some money, just to offset some lost income. But really, it's something that the project has never been. It was a situation where anybody's income was depending on it. I could have made nothing on the game and been just fine, and that's a key distinction, because I know there has been problems with Kickstarter, RPGs and things like that, where things haven't worked out. And typically what's happening there is the developers are depending on the money from, the Kickstarter to basically to be their, primary income stream. And then if things take longer, then, that can cause real problems. And that's never been the situation with Nox Archaist.
Yeah. And for those of you watching as I record right now, that is a very important point for any developers listening in, that every game's every game's development is different, and it's always hard, especially for people looking from the outside, to know, what's the state of the project, how developers are going about it. And as you just said, one of the big points, will this game be finished? Because we have seen, not only on Kickstarter, but many Steam games that have unfortunately weren't able to cross that finish line for one reason or another.
Sure, absolutely. It's definitely a reasonable concern that people have when deciding whether to get behind a game. That's understandable, and I can appreciate the challenges that the developers are going through. I don't think anybody goes into a project like that with bad intentions. It's all good intentions. It's just sometimes things don't work out, and oftentimes. There's so many skill sets that go into delivering a successful game project. It's programming, the technical side is huge, no question. But finance skills, business skills, marketing skills, customer service skills, all of those are very important as well. And it's hard to find those skills. If you don't have them yourself, it can be really hard to recruit team members in that do, without inadvertently basically exacerbating the financial situation with the project. Because if you're talking about hiring people, that's just putting more financial pressure on whatever money is raised. And so I was in the very fortunate position of, I was into programming in the 80s and 90s, and my career kind of started out in technology, but then it shifted to business and finance in technology companies. And so over the course of the last couple of decades prior to getting into this project, I've had the benefit of, really rounding out my skill set in some of those other arenas. And so when, I decided to take on this project, I felt pretty comfortable that, I was going to be able to be a one-man show if I had to, and then had the fortune of encountering like a dozen other people with various skills that there was something that they could do better than I could. I could do it, but they could do it better, kind of thing. And those people joined the team and were able to then make Nox Archaist even better than it would have been, essentially. Kind of some extra icing on the cake, if you will. And that worked out really well. More than, I don't want to minimize it, more than icing on the cake. I mean, if I had done, you can kind of see some of the tile graphics here in the game. These were done by a professional artist. If I had done the graphics, they would have looked an awful lot like graphics that people had already seen before. So I would have been able to finish the game if I had to, because I had that rounded skill set. But because I was able to, as the project went on and became popular, be able to get people involved that were better at specific things, that better than I was, like the graphics, like the sound, and all that. It turned into a much better project than it would have resulted in. But I think it's an important point. Because it comes down to managing, risk. And if in getting into a game development project, if you can kind of put together a plan for, here's how I'm confident I can get the bare bones of this done. And for everybody, it's not going to be doing it all themselves, but maybe, getting a couple people together. Make sure you've got those skill sets covered, at least at a bare bones level, to be able to get across the finish line. And then if you can recruit more people as you go, to go from good to great to awesome, fantastic.
Mm-hmm. A quick question came in from Gold Moon. They ask, how did you guys convince Apple computers to license the Apple II ROMs to distribute with the PC games?
That's a good question. The emulator that is under the hood of the PC and Mac version of the game is not something that we wrote. That is licensed through a third party. I'd actually have to ask them that question, so I don't have an answer on that today.
All right. And coming back to kind of the design development of Nox here, as you've been talking about with building this game, that excuse me, this was not conceived to be this massive commercial success. And part of it, I think, has been just like figuring out, what the audience is looking for a game like this. And I guess my next question is, like, keeping with this theme of building Nox Archaist as his love letter to Apple II design while looking forward at the same time, I guess, how did, like, the fans and, your playtesters, like, respond to, like, when you try to do something different or new? And if you have any examples of that, definitely feel free to mention it.
Fans or playtesters trying to, when we try to do something different or new. I guess from the, there weren't really that many people that had seen the game before the testers. Mm-hmm. And with the testers, thinking back on that, the reaction was generally positive to what we put in front of them. And then they had a huge stream of suggestions, basically for how to make it better. And some of those were practical and we were able to implement, and some of them, turned out not to be feasible. Would have been great to have, but couldn't quite make it within the constraints. But ultimately, we're kind of spun out with the testers. There's a point where I asked them, give us a rating here from 0 to 10 on, how ready we are for release. And it was like 5 was acceptable, and 10 is like, oh, wow, awesome, off the charts, incredible. And the average score amongst a dozen testers was like 9.5. So even though we had to make some trade-off decisions and couldn't do everything they were suggesting, that was the net impression that they had. And I have to apologize, I may not be totally understanding the question about something different or new. If anyone's able to clarify that, I'd be happy to take another swing at it.
Yeah. I guess just what I kind of meant was like, with any of like the evolutions or new things that you added with Nox Archaist that wasn't previously seen on the Apple II, like how did they respond to when they saw something like brand new or original like that?
Sure, I see. It was very positive. The by and large, things like the full screen view. Lots of people were saying that's just like awesome. The pop-up windows, inventory-driven management, lots of positive, compliments, coming from that. So I think where the tripwire in this is the testers were never like really harsh with me or anything, but when they kind of critiqued something, if you will, in this category, there were some times where doing something new would result in some unintended consequences. Because it was like, if it's been done in an Apple II RPG before, in terms of mechanic, it's kind of been vetted out. We know it works. And then if we try to, tinker around with that and go beyond that, then sometimes there can be unintended consequences from that affect gameplay. And sometimes, the testers would point that out. It's like, well, yeah, that's kind of great in concept, except, when I do this and this, I'm like stuck. So in that kind of situation, the reaction was typically generally positive, but it was like, you kind of need to polish it up again, because in actual practice, there's some rough edges.
Yeah, and another question came in from Sean. Any good war stories or near disasters worth sharing?
Yeah, oh, sure. There was a near disaster on launch day. Disaster might be a bit too strong of a word. I'm confident that we would have managed, but there's something that I haven't talked to other developers and asked them, like, hey, did you experience this? But there's like a fog of release that happens when you hit the launch button and everything starts to happen. You're posting the announcements and your Discord is blowing up, your Twitter's blowing up, everything's blowing up. And you're hunkered down and I got to finish getting the announcements posted and then jump in and see what's going on. Well, I was very fortunate, to one, have, development teammates, and then two, a wonderful supportive tester community who engaged on Discord to support the new players coming in. So by the time I got done with the announcements and I'm circling into the Discord to see what's going on, I don't know what's going on. Basically, it's the fog of release. They knew what was going on to an extent, but I didn't. And I get a message from one of the other programmers on the project, and he says, there's a file on the hard drive disk image called srtn.merch that is a 0-byte file, which means it failed in like the build process of putting the file on there. Something went wrong, and so the file's effectively not there. And so I'm thinking, srtn.merch, well, that's going to be the merchants. So anytime somebody talks to a merchant, the game's going to crash, the game's going to hang, what's going to happen? I don't know. I'm just in total scramble mode to then try to reproduce a problem. And I'm thinking, as it's happening, I'm thinking like, man, we're going to have to do an emergency software update on release day. This is what's going through my mind. And so I'm like chatting a couple other team members, giving them a heads up. I don't know exactly what's going on yet, but this is where I think it's headed. And thinking like, well, it's it's not the end of the world. We've got an option right here in the main menu called Import Saved Game, so that if we issue a software update, an updated disk image that would be distributed, something that people download. They would boot up the new version of the game, and they'd go to Import Saved Game, and they'd get a prompt to basically insert a different file with their old save game, and it would suck it in, and be great. So that's all there, and we've got videos that kind of give a walkthrough for how to do that in the Nox app that's bundled with the game, as well as different popular Apple II emulators. Except that the video walkthroughs, I mean, it's not really that hard, but the video walkthroughs have not been updated for what the final release package looks like in the zip file and the DMG file on the Mac. So it's going to be directing the user to find files and folders that don't exist. So I mean, it's not ideal. No, it would not have been ideal. But that's what's going through my mind as far as what we're dealing with for issuing a software update on the first day. And so unfortunately, as I'm thinking about all that, and I'm going into the game, and I'm talking to a merchant expecting it to crash or hang or do something, and it's actually not happening. And I'm puzzled, well, why isn't it happening? And trying to remember what's in what file. And fortunately, one of the teammates that I chatted about, the heads up of what's going on, because he happened to be the person that had set up in our storefront for, when you order the game, you get a download button. He set that up, so I'm giving him a heads up because thinking he's going to have to change out those files. Well, he's also one of the programmers, and he comes back to me. And he's thinking much more clearly than I am at this point from a programming point of view. Well, he jumped into the GitHub repo and checked this, and he's like, Mark, I think you removed that file and merged it into something else. And suddenly the light bulb came on. I'm like, oh, that's right, I did. Because back to the constraints that we were talking about before with the Apple II. Everything has to fit on, these 180K floppy disks, even though most people are playing in emulators or even on real hardware, playing on hard drives on the real Apple II hardware. We built everything to run on floppy disks. And, some of the disks had empty space. Some of the disks were like the bottleneck and constrained. And I kept overflowing the 180 key on a particular disk side. And in the very late stages, like in testing, as I'm resolving bugs that were increasing the disk footprint, and the way I was resolving that was to eliminate files on the disk and merge them into other files, because in the Apple II world, well, it's probably true in any file system, but basically there's some overhead, like 512 bytes of overhead just for the existence of a file within the ProDOS file structure. And, I'm dealing with, overflows of very small amounts. And so a couple of times it's like, all right, I'll eliminate a file, take the data that was in that file, put it in an existing file, save 512 bytes of disk space on the bottleneck disk, and then update the game engine pointers to just refer to the other file to grab that data and get it, indexed to the right point to seek, to it and get it. And so in the process of doing that, I eliminated this srtn.merge file from the game engine, moved everything over to some other file, but I forgot to pull it out of the build process. There's a series of batch files that run that actually take the binary code generated by the cross assembler that basically wrote the game in, and it creates these binary files on my Windows 10 machine, and this build process grabs those binary files and then writes them onto what we call these disk image files that are another binary file that's in the format of like an Apple II disk structure. And so when that build process ran, the binary file for srtn.merge didn't exist because the game engine didn't have it anymore, didn't need it anymore. But when the code tried to add it to this disk image file, that code just wasn't robust enough to do like a fatal error and shoot off fireworks saying, hey, wait, there's a problem. It basically just failed silently amidst a whole bunch of text that's flying across on the screen when I run the build process. And the way that it deals with that problem is it creates a 0-byte file in the disk image. Hence why that existed in at launch, and my teammate who saw it wasn't involved in those kinds of game engine operations. So typically a 0-byte file means something important is missing. So he was totally correct to sound the alarm. It could have been a serious issue, but fortunately turned out to basically be absolutely nothing that was important to deal with at that time that was going to affect anybody. But it was a heart-stopping moment, or as I think the question asker asked, I think would be the closest to a near disaster that I can recall offhand, and that's a fresh one.
It's good to hear. I guess another question regarding the design of Nox. From a gameplay point of view, we've already mentioned that it is definitely built on the old school CRPG model and such. With kind of how you guys and everyone developed the game, I guess, are there any, did you go further or do anything different in terms of the old school CRPG archetype that went into Nox?
Could you repeat the last part of the question?
Did you do anything that was either different or elevated with Nox compared to the original Apple II games that obviously you were inspired by when developing?
I would definitely say yes. There's and I mean we've talked about some of the raw mechanics before that were kind of pushing the envelope and things like that. So so to talk about it, I think as I'm hearing the question, it's kind of asking more broadly. Well, here's how I would think of it. In a large way, I mean, Nox Archaist is a romp through old and familiar tropes. That, I mean, Richard Garriott would call it a seek and slay the evil wizard game. If anyone's familiar with that term, as he's talked about the evolution into Ultima 4 and 5 and so forth with the virtues and things like that, which I totally respect what he was doing there. What I wanted to do was, it's the seek and slay the evil wizard trope is been done many times. I like it, and many other people do, so let's do that again, of course with some new and different twists along the way. And in terms of Apple II games, I think what will stand out the most as far as that goes is, one, the story. The story is deep and it's rich, and I mean Ultima had a good story too, but a lot of the Apple II RPGs were very thin on the story. This is a deep and rich story, and it's written in an arc. I literally read a book about how to write screenplays before diving into the Nox Archaist story. And not that you become a master of anything from reading one book, but I wanted to draw in some of the concepts that go into making a good story in really any medium. And apply that, and that I think will stand out when going through Nox Archaist. If you focus on the main line, there's lots of side quests, but if you focus on the main line, it's going to take you through a story, a journey that there's twists and turns and false climaxes. You're going to think what's going on and how it's going to end, and then woof, it's going to turn on its head. And that also, I think also this gets into a kind of a change sort of a thing, is in the process of doing that, we embedded some linear elements into the game. It's an open world game fundamentally, but there's some linear elements to the storyline where the game world will react to things that you've done, sometimes in a minor way, as simple as an NPC, when you complete a quest, will in fact actually acknowledge usually that you've done so, which was not typically the case. Might even acknowledge that you've done that quest and set you off on a different one. There's an awareness in a minor way like that's present that was not the norm. But then also along this story arc that I described, there are some major ones too. There's a point where actually my in-game character Nox Fred shows up, appears out of the mist. Nox Fred is a wizard, sort of appears out of the mist, and in some kind of I'm not going to be able to remember what it was replicated, but in some kind of a in-story sort of a voice, it advises the player that they should make a backup of the game before proceeding forward. And that's because there's a big linear thing that's about to happen that's going to massively change the game world. And just in case the player wants to go back to where they were before, they'll have that backup, because, of course, operating within the constraints of the Apple II, if we're going to do a big, massive linear change like that, it's not like we're going to have extra resources laying around to provide some convenient way to get back to anything. It's going to change what's on your disks, kind of thing. So that I think is something else that will stand out in terms of how the typical Apple II CRPG was constructed from an experience point of view.
Okay. Gold Moon asks, any Easter eggs if you get the enter code right on the main menu?
Well, yes. They aren't intended to be Easter eggs per se. However, there is some functionality that is associated with entering the code, and I guess at this point, I should probably just be a little bit less cryptic about it. We ran a Kickstarter, and the top tier of the Kickstarter was Lord of the Realm. And there were some benefits, some rewards to backing the Lord of the Realm tier, and some of those affect the way the game operates. And there's 2 Lords of the Realm, and they have codes that if they enter them at the front end, basically gets them those benefits. So there we go. Cat's out of the bag. We've been really cryptic about what that menu option was for a long time, but that's what it is. It's nothing more than that. It may, as we've said before, it may well be used to facilitate additional content, unlocking additional content in the future, because it's a really handy little mechanism there. But right now, today, that is the only functionality that's attached to it. So if you manage to get the code right, then yeah, I guess technically you can uncover some unintentional Easter eggs there as a result.
Another question came in from InTV Prime. Asked, is there support for taking input from Mattel and television hand controllers?
I missed the first part of the question, Josh. Could you repeat
that? Is there support for taking input from Mattel in television hand controllers?
I don't think so. If there is, I'll qualify it this way: if the Apple II supports has any kind of support mechanism for those kinds of controllers, then maybe. And I'm not aware of there being anything like that, but the Apple II community is full of innovative people that are, doing all kinds of things. I mean, I go to a convention once a year called Kansas Fest, that is a primarily an Apple II, but to a lesser extent, Commodore and Atari folks visit there as well. Convention, and I mean, there are people there that are demoing things. Like there was a guy that had his Apple II rigged up to initiate the popping of popcorn on a popcorn popper that's sitting next to the computer. And he's like, and at home I've got it set up where it can open my garage. Now, why would anybody, do you need an Apple II to do any of those things? Why would you want to? I can't answer any of those questions, but I know that there is a large number of people in the hobby that are tinkering with stuff. So the prospect that somebody has made some kind of a card that you insert in an Apple II that interfaces with other controllers, it's entirely possible. And if it does it in a way where it's flowing the commands, fooling the computer into thinking that it's like keyboard input or something, It's possible. I'm going to say that I'd be a little bit surprised if there was, but I can't rule anything out for that reason.
Okay. Let's see. Gold Moon asks, did you guys solve the floppy disk problem yet?
We currently have a beta version of the floppy version of the game that we're not able to break to get it to crash on drives that are operating properly. We have gotten it to crash on drives that, according to an oscilloscope, are not emitting the proper electromagnetic signals. But that's a whole different, category of thing. So that's where which is a lot better than where we were when we announced, I think in early November, that there were some issues. So we have in fact found and fixed some timing issues with the floppy drives since that original announcement. And the reason that we can't proclaim at this point that, it's stable, it's no longer beta, it's the final version, even though we haven't been able to break it, is because, as I think, any Apple II user would appreciate, we're dealing with 40-year-old hardware here. And, we've got, we want to be really, really sure, because this is important. This is not, there's a bug in the digital version. We issue a software update, and there's a slight inconvenience of importing a save game. This is going on physical floppy disks. We're actually not offering the physical floppy disk version anymore. If anyone's looking at the collector's boxes on our website, but for the Kickstarter backers, the pre-order backers that had the floppy disk version, I mean, it's going on physical floppies, going in the mail, and we want to be absolutely sure, to the degree that we can, when that goes out. So there's ongoing testing to get to that point. And at this point, my estimate I was just asked the other day on our Discord on when we would have an update, and I gave them this informal one, but we're expecting that sometime in January, we'll have a formal update posted to the Kickstarter page and also our blog on the status of the floppy version. And depending on how testing goes between now and then, we'll determine whether that update has a shipping ETA or not.
Okay. And as a quick time check for you and for the audience, we are just about an hour and 10 in terms of our conversation. So I think I have about maybe another 15, 20 minutes of questions. We'll see if anything comes up from chat.
Sure.
But for the people watching us live right now, I definitely feel free to keep bringing in your questions for Mark about Nox.
I'm going to stand up for a minute, but ask away.
Yeah, sure. I'm just catching up with chat to see if anything else came in here. Nothing just yet. But I can definitely see we have a lot of fans for Nox as well as for classic games on the chat. So thank you everyone for tuning in. And yes, I guess that takes me to this next question then. As we've said, with your play testers and with your fans, you definitely built Nox Archaist for classic CRPG design. And I just wanted to ask you, when you did show it to more contemporary or more modern audience of people who are more used to RPGs today, I guess what did they think of the game, and did their feedback at all influence or affected Nox Archaist's development?
That's a good question. I think that there's a variety of reactions. There certainly are many people that are more in the modern gaming audience that they've never played a CRPG, kind of profile, that they look at it and they're like, "What's this?" Why would I want to play something with 40-year-old graphics? And so yeah, I mean, there definitely is that. There definitely is that. There's also people that have no roots in CRPGs, Apple II or otherwise, coming at it from a modern perspective, that have been very positive about it, that are actually intrigued about old computers and things like that. There is a breed of person out there like that. Not they don't number nearly as many as the other category, I'm sure, but they are out there. Kids, I mean, I've showed the game to my teenage nieces and nephews, and granted they're going to be a little bit biased, but they enjoyed the game, and there certainly are some teenagers, I think, that if they thought something was total crap, they would probably not hesitate to say so. So I felt a little bit surprised actually with that. And some of the testers commented, their kids playing it as well. So I mean, I think it is a game that is transcending the barriers a little bit in terms of engaging people that might not otherwise, because it is a little bit more approachable. And so to the aspect of the question of, did that affect the game? And the answer is yes and no. Did it affect the game in the sense of, did it really dilute the old school nature of it? I would say no, because this is not a game that's going to tell you exactly what to do, where you follow the dashed yellow line. I talked to the person with the yellow question mark over their head to get the quest, follow the dashed line. There's nothing like that. This is old school. There's a quest log in the game, which is cool. But it's also a get out your spiral notebook, because this is an 8-bit quest log. It's not a quest journal. You're going to still be writing down clues. There's still going to be maps to make and puzzles to solve, and it's very challenging. People that are old school gamers, that they want a really challenging game. Nox Archaist is going to be that for them. At the same time, it's more approachable because the game has a soft start. There's an in-game tutorial at the front end. That's not as robust as modern tutorials, but it's going to help. The very early part of the game, like the very first battle that you're going to get into, you're not going to die. Probably not even the second or the third. There's a small little sort of starter area that I carved out, so the player can have some positive experiences before the game really kind of gets real from an old school perspective. That is in contrast to throw somebody that doesn't have CRPG roots into something like Bard's Tale 1, where learning by dying is something that begins the moment you step foot out of the tavern where you created your characters. Much more approachable in that sense. So that's why I say yes and no. And we were trying to strike a balance, obviously, to maintain that old school difficulty and challenge, because that's what's missing, from our perspective, from games today. But yet then also taking the opportunity to make them more approachable where we could, without compromising sort of the original goals.
Yeah. And as a brief aside on that, like, for developers watching this right now, that has always been one of the big challenges when it comes not just to game development, but even for developers who go for a modern retro design. Because I've seen plenty of games that, when they look at something that's considered old school retro, they just mean, we're just make this as difficult as possible and not really look at approachability.
Sure.
And it is that very tricky balance, because there are things from old school games that are in there simply as just limitations of the design back then, versus something that would be considered a fair challenge. And I see that as a freaking mistake or a trap that a lot of newer developers kind of fall into when they say, "Oh, I'm going to make a platformer like Mario, or I'm going to make an old school RPG," and it either plays worse in those games, or it's just so completely inaccessible unless you were a master at those games, 20, 30 years ago.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's a very good point, and I've run into those kinds of games myself where that's been the case.
Mm-hmm. And I also want to give a quick shout because when you were talking about drawing maps and writing things down in your notebook, we had a few comments about people using graph paper. So I know we have some old school CRPG fans in the chat. We're bringing out graph paper discussions for those kinds of games.
Absolutely. And something else I just want to note here too is that there some of the testers made maps, and they're going to be posting them and probably even complete walkthroughs of the game at some point. So at some point this is going to be like any other game today, where if you want to, you can go Google the maps and Google the walkthroughs and things like that. But at the same time, the game, what I think is important is the game is designed to be played where the player is making maps. So therefore, people that's what they want, that's what they're going to get. They're not going to be distracted by, there's this in-game mapper that makes it really hard for me to feel satisfied by making my own map. That's not there. The game world size. The game world size is big by Apple II standards. It's as big as Ultima 5. But that's still small enough that you can get fulfillment from mapping and careful exploration, as opposed to modern games that would literally take you hours of real world time to walk from one side to the other. You're just not going to get satisfaction, or I know I wouldn't. I don't think most people get satisfaction out of mapping something like that by hand, because the game wasn't designed for it to be done that way. So I'm trying to. I think we kind of have something for everybody here in that regard, if that makes sense.
A question came in a few minutes ago from Michael Porosky, and hopefully I didn't butcher your name. I was good with the first name. We'll see if I got that one right. But his question was: aside from launch, what part during the development process was the most scariest / riskiest?
Well, that's an interesting question, because obviously we covered launch. The scariest, most riskiest. I would have to say that it was what we talked about before, the stage of experimentation, where I was afraid of filling up the memory and filling up the disk by adding too many features, and therefore creating a situation where I'd have to redo months and months and months of work, or accept a poorly balanced or broken game. That I think would have been the scariest time period. And once we were past that and the engine was done, and it was all about making content, making the maps and the NPC dialogue, using processes that were defined, my heart rate definitely went down a lot when we crossed the threshold into content.
Okay. And few comments have been popping up, so I figured this could be a good time to talk about it. We've been getting some comments more about the physical edition of the game. People wanted to see like the box. If you have any, knickknacks and curios to show off for Nox Archaist, feel free.
Absolutely. Let's take a look here. This is what the box set looks like. We have both a regular box set and a collector's box set, in addition to the digital edition that can be downloaded. The collector's edition is the most popular, so that's actually what I have here to show.
Could you maybe zoom in or like move in a little bit closer if people can't see it too much, which is like how far away you are?
Sure. Yeah.
Ooh.
How's this?
Yep, that's good.
Stuff on the back. Yep. All right, so we'll open it up here. So this is kind of what it looks like if you just take off the shrink wrap and open the top of the box. This is what you see. And the very first item here, this is a writ from Queen Isa. Queen Isa is the ruler of Valley, the world of Nox Archaist, and she has issued you as the hero a writ of authority to bear arms and travel freely throughout her realm. And of course, it is as any proper writ should be of this genre. It is wax sealed and stamped. And I'm not going to break the wax seal and show what's actually in here, but be assured that if you do choose to open this up, there's some wonderfully fonted, medieval fonted, lore-based writing on this writ that is fun to read. That is, you don't have to read it in order to win the game, but it is relevant to the game story. And the next item in the box here is the cloth map. Get it right side up here. Sorry, I'm kind of standing off to the side so I can hold it closer. All right. So I'll back out here so now you can see the whole thing, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay. Now I'll zoom in a little bit here. So this was a key thing for us. We wanted a cloth map with beautiful detail and colors, and the map does not have everything on it in the overworld of the game. There's some islands that aren't there. It doesn't show all the towns or all the the dungeon entrances and things like that. So it's a good guide, and there's still plenty to explore above world and below. All right, so next we have the Nox Archaist manual with cover art done by Dennis Lubay, the famous artist that did the Ultima box covers and many other games. And on the back of the manual is a quick reference card. So you don't have to keep track of two separate items. And it is 125 pages. There's art filled with lore. It'll be a wonderful read from anybody that really enjoyed reading the Ultima manuals and other games like that.
And I gotta say, while I don't have too much experience with CRPG games, I do love a good physical box edition of the game. And I remember reading like the Blizzard manuals, with all that lovely lore in them back in the day.
Yep. Yeah, I always liked that too. I was the kind of person that I read the manual before I played the game, and I enjoyed it just for the read. It built the anticipation, helped me feel immersed in the world, and things like that. So, also in the game is a coin of the realm.
Ooh, there we go. Yeah.
So there's issued by Queen Isa. So we got her name on the back here. and this is, there's some weight to this. This is metal. This is, you feel some weight in the palm of your hand with this coin. And the coin of the realm is an artifact in the game. That is also in your box. And then it comes wrapped like this. There's also another item here. A gem of power. And this also is an artifact in the game that you get to have coming with your box. And then the last item here is this cute little USB drive that looks like a 5 1/4-inch floppy disk. And with both box sets, you get this USB drive and the digital edition of the game. For both Mac and Windows, or disk images for your favorite Apple II emulator, all come on the disk image or I'm sorry, they all come on the USB drive, so that you don't have to download the digital edition. You can, but it's conveniently on this USB drive if you want to play both on real hardware and on modern computers.
What I find kind of funny is that the audience here knows exactly what the floppy disks are, and I'm just imagining that there's probably somebody watching this record right now in the future going, "What the heck is a floppy disk? What, what are they talking about?"
As it turns out, I have one. This is not a Nox Archaist floppy disk. This is just some random floppy disk I pulled out of my box. But this is the sleeve. You take off the sleeve, and so you get this kind of black square shaped thing with the hole in the center. And I'll hold up the this is I'll hold up the replica again. Versus obviously a bit of a size difference, but
yeah.
I assume that will be appreciated.
And for the kids watching this right now, any kids, this came out before the time of the internet and cable modems. I have to say that because I gave a talk at a library once. I was describing to a teenager what a dial-up modem was, and she just looked at me like I was describing, horse and buggy as how we got around back in the day.
Absolutely, that was the case.
I think I am just about out of questions. I do have a few kind of like wrap up questions for you, but for the chat watching, this will be officially last call for questions. I saw one just came in while we were showing off the physical goods. Let me go back up. Arnaud Colette, I'm pretty sure I butchered that name. I do apologize. Asked, Mark, why did you choose the Apple II instead of other computers?
The Apple II was the first computer that I ever used. I was 5 years old when my family got an Apple II growing up, and I learned quickly. couldn't do much right away. It was more watching my older brothers that are 7 and 10 years older than me. Kind of watching them learning to program and playing games, and I was sitting there watching them, and occasionally they'd let me do something. That was kind of probably the first few years, but that's and then really from there. I mean, I think I was maybe 15 years old when my dad bought a 386 IBM PC. So I had a good chunk of my childhood was spent playing games on the Apple II computer and trying to learn programming and program games on the Apple II computer. So to me, when it came to writing a retro game, it was going to be on the real hardware. To me, there was just no other choice other than the Apple II because that was it was basically completing one of the goals that I had as a kid was to write a game like this on the Apple II. So that's the reason.
All right. So I'm trying to think if there's anything else design-wise. Because while I'm trying to think, are there any aspects of the development or design of Nox that we didn't touch on that you would like to bring up now?
That's a good question. Was that the last question from the comments?
Yeah, I'm not seeing any other questions from the audience. Again, if you have any, this would be the time to get them in. So, with these discussions, for the new people watching, we get very in-depth here. So we try to cover a lot of stuff whenever we have developers on the talk.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if anyone has any questions, chime in. Otherwise, really, the only other thing that I wanted to mention is where to get the game and a few other things like that. Is this a good time?
Sure.
So, if you're interested in playing Nox Archaist, you can get the game at noxarchaist.com. It comes as the digital edition that you can download, a collector's box set, or a regular box set. The box sets are currently sold out. Our first run of them sold out actually yesterday,
Nice.
2 days after launch. So they are available as a pre-order, which we expect to ship in February. And additionally, because we love the movie Spaceballs so much, at noxarchaist.com, you can also find merchandising. Merchandising. At noxarchaist.com, you will see Nox Archaist, the t-shirt, Nox Archaist, the hat, Nox Archaist, the Dennis Loubet art poster, like I have on my wall here. And, who knows, one day you might even find Nox Archaist, the flamethrower.
I was just about to say that.
It is currently not for sale. We have 2 of these. We made them as a stunt for the very first presentation given on the game at the Apple II Convention Kansas Fest. And we still have them. And like I said, someday they might show up on the online store. But for now, there's lots of other items. And, right around Christmas time, our players have just really been loving that and loading up on the merch and everything else. So, but yeah, there's that. And I also wanted to say many thanks to the backers of Nox Archaist and my development teammates, both of which were instrumental in making Nox Archaist the game that it is.
All right. And I do like the little home shopping network segment there for the cast. Let's see. One question came in from Bill Lang. He asked, can you explain your in-game character name since people are going to see it a lot?
Explain the in-game character names, like the pronunciation of them?
Your in-game character name, I guess.
Like Nox Fred? Like,
yeah.
What's the story behind Nox Fred? Fred, there's 2 F's? Is that
that
the question? Okay. Yeah, I think I've shared the story with Bill, and he's just prompting me here because some people have found it to be a fun story. We'll see. So here's the deal on Nox Fred. When I was playing Ultima 3, well, more specifically, when my older brother was playing Ultima 3 in the 80s, when I was kind of probably a little bit too young to play, and I'm watching him play, and he's in the Ultima 3 create character screen, and he was typing in his character name as Fred, and the keys on the Apple II are really slippery. On the Apple IIe and the 2 Plus specifically, really slippery. So he kind of finger slip as he's typing in Fred for his character name, and so it comes out FFRED. And we have kind of odd senses of humor, my brothers and I. So we both thought it was pretty funny, especially me at 7 years old or so, probably at the time. So he keeps the character name and plays his party with a ranger named Fred, FFRED. So I just thought that was the coolest thing. So as I got into playing RPGs over the years, that would be the name that I would usually pick for my lead character, would be Fred, sort of remembering back to that original moment. And then the Nox part, of course, is related to Nox Archaist, and even more than just sort of the obvious connection. For those who haven't played the game, I'll just hint this a little bit. Nox is actually a title that is used by some NPCs in the game. So that's actually more specifically why I modified my longtime RPG name to being Nox Fred. And oftentimes I'm asked, if the F is silent or not, and the answer is it depends. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't.
All right. And one final question from the audience. I think this is a nice one to end things on, then we'll get to kind of my wrap up for you. But in order to ask, if you had to do it all again, would you? With developing Nox Archaist?
The answer is maybe. That's the best I can say right now. I definitely am going to take a break after Nox Archaist is fully complete and settled in, etc. And I'm not in a rush for that to happen. I'm having a blast right now, and this will be a big focus for me for some time. But at some point after things kind of settle in, I do want to take a break and play some games again.
Yeah.
Because some people know this, but not everyone. I had to swear off playing games for 5 years to do this, and that was a personal choice. But I knew from experience trying to make games as a kid that was the easiest way not to finish a game, was get distracted playing a game.
Yeah.
And then by the time you get back to the one you were making, it's not really fresh anymore, and I might as well just start over and make a different game. So I decided, nope, I'm committed to this. I'm not going to play games. I did violate that once when Shroud of the Avatar came out. I played that for a couple of months, but other than that, I have not played games in 5 years. So I'm going to have some fun doing that. And then at some point there, after a time, I'll just see where things are at as far as would I embark on this kind of adventure again.
Great. So I guess to begin to wrap things up, I guess just a few final questions from me. I guess one thing that I'm kind of curious about, again, keeping with, again, the fact that you were developing this on the Apple II, and it's not exactly a modern computer, I was just wondering, does patches or updates, I guess this is my own modern sensibilities coming in, but how does that work if there's any bugs or things you have to fix that arise with Nox Archaist? Is the patching process different or unique in this case?
For players playing on, I assume you're talking about on original Apple II hardware. Yeah. So for players that have a hard drive in their Apple II and are going to be playing the hard drive version of the game, the process is fairly straightforward. What they would do is basically the same thing that somebody in an emulator would do. Is they go to the import saved game, and they're going to insert one hard drive image and then flip it out for the next, and it updates the game. Depending on the hard drive card, it might not support multiple disk images being mounted into the hard drive at the same time, in which case they might need to fire up an emulator to do the upgrade, and then copy it onto a USB drive that they then insert into the hard drive card. These hard drive cards in the Apple IIs are, they actually have USB interfaces nowadays. Obviously they didn't in the 80s, so that's how that would work. On floppy disk, the concept would basically be to transfer the floppy disk images first make a backup of your floppy disks, and then transfer the updated floppy disk images onto the floppy disk masters, the ones with the Nox Archaist labels on them. And that's a process that many Apple II users are familiar with, because that's how you play games on the Apple II on floppy. For a lot of people that want to play them on the real floppy drives, is people have boxes of old games on their shelves, but they also download disk images and transfer their floppies and things like that. And then once that transfer would be done, you'd be booting up the upgraded game on your labeled Nox Archaist disks, and then select the import game menu option, and it's going to tell you to insert the disks with your old save game, which is the backup that you made, and voila, you've got it all rolled up then.
All right. So, to wrap things up then, you already mentioned where people can pick up Nox Archaist, and if you can send me those links after the stream, I'll include those in the recorded version of it for people to click on. Will Nox be available on other distribution platforms like Steam, Humble, and so on?
It's already up on itch.io, and it is not on Steam yet. I'm planning on looking into that over the course of the next few months,
Okay.
and I would say likely we'll end up on Steam somewhere around that time frame. And there really aren't any others on my radar at this point, other than Good Old Games. I'd like to get on Good Old Games, but it's from what other developers have told me, it's hard to get on Good Old Games.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure if that's going to happen. And I'm sorry, did you mention a different one?
I'm
in
sorry?
addition to those? What was there an additional platform you mentioned?
Steam?
Okay, we covered Steam.
Yeah.
Yeah, then.
Okay. Let's see. Oh, I guess here's one. Any other merchandise you're playing for Nox? Again, we have the full litany behind you, but anything else new or upcoming for the fans watching to get excited about? Oh, thank you, Tapestry. Humble Bundle was another platform I asked.
Okay. That one I haven't looked into, so I would definitely say no.
Okay.
No near-term plans on that. Yeah, as far as merchandise goes, we've been adding a steady stream of stuff. There's already dozens of products in there, wrapping the Nox Archaist art around all sorts of stuff. There's iPhone cases, there's backpacks, there's more things than I can remember. And my teammates that are running the store are very creative, and they keep coming up with new ideas of things to put in there. And I would say just check back every few weeks, and there's a fair chance you probably find something new. Now CT6502 I believe is in the chat, and he's actually one of my teammates, one of the ones that's running the store. So he can feel free to blurt out if there's any ideas that he had in the hopper.
All right. So here's a question. You already said that once things have settled down, you're going to take a break and finally get to play some more games that you've been missing out.
Sure.
So the first part of this question is, do you have any on your list that you are dying to get back to playing? Or to play for the first time, I guess I should say.
Yeah. Well, I have a long list. The challenge is going to be being selective in which ones am I going to prioritize. So I can definitely say what my first plays are going to be.
Mm-hmm.
On the modern gaming side, I really want to play John Romero's new game, Empire of Sin. I'm really kind of a fan of like mob movies and things like that, and it's set in the 1920s mobster Al Capone era in Chicago, and I'm just really excited to check that out. It was just released here a few weeks ago, in fact, so might be able to get in on it before it's years old. Excited about that. I want to check out the latest Civilization game because I've played Civilization over many iterations over the years, and it's just one of those games to me that it's like I can always come back to and see how they've upgraded it. So I want to do that. In terms of on the CRPG side, I played the early Ultimas up through Ultima 5 quite a bit over the years, whereas the ones that came after, not so much. I haven't played Ultima 6 since it came out in the early 90s, so I'm going to play that again. Ultima 7, I only really dabbled in when it came out. I didn't have a computer fast enough to really properly run it. Was part of the issue, so I'm going to play that. And then I've never touched Ultima 8 or Ultima 9, so I'm going to play those as well. And I only know what I've heard about those, and what I've heard has been kind of mixed. But I basically I feel like I want to experience the rest of the Ultima series, and just kind of complete and round out my overall Ultima experience.
All right. Quick question came in. Arnold asked, could you highlight the soundtracks coming with the game?
The soundtrack is, I believe it's like 9 or so songs, 9 or 10, and there's basically like a couple combat songs, a couple town/castle songs, a couple that are more underworld themed, and the intention behind it is that, and it might help to clarify the idea for the soundtrack was conceived before we knew that there was going to be Mockingbird support in the game for in-game music. There was a time where that was not actually a given. And so the soundtrack was conceived, which is cool anyway, even though we have the in-game music, as essentially an alternative that somebody could queue up that soundtrack on their iPhone or Android or tablet or whatever, and listen to, a very kind of a modern but yet fantasy themed soundtrack while playing the game. And you can kind of do it in a couple of ways. You can run it as a loop, or what I've had fun doing is just queue up or play the songs individually. If I'm walking into a town, I play a town song. If I'm walking into a dungeon, I play an underworld song, or combat song. And that really, I find that to be very, very immersive, doing it that way.
All right. So, my second to last question then is something I always like to ask developers when they finish a modern, retro, or an old school design game. And that is, have you started to think about what your next game will be? And do you see yourself continuing to work with the Apple II, like for wherever your next project could be?
Question. And so, well, and it ties into my maybe answer before. Whether there's going to be a Nox Archaist 2 or expansion packs or anything like that, maybe is really the answer there. But if there is another game, it would be on the Apple II, like an Nox Archaist 2, it would be on the Apple II. And yeah, I mean, I've got a long list of notes that I made of ideas on what that might be, just so that I'm prepared if I decide and my teammates decide that we're going to do that. As far as other platforms go, there's the possibility of ports. No guarantee, but possibility of ports like Atari and Amiga, Commodore. We've gotten lots of requests for ports to other platforms, and there's definitely some big challenges there in doing that. So I don't want anyone to get too hopeful. Like, for one, Nox Archaist requires 128K of RAM. The Commodore is called 64. The number 64 there is for a reason. So there's definitely some big challenges there. And I don't have any experience programming on those platforms. So one of the prerequisites would be getting partnered up with somebody or somebody's to really take on the project of doing that. The only porting project that is currently in play is actually for the Apple II GS. Nox Archaist, as an 8-bit game, will run on the Apple II GS because it's backward compatible. But the GS is a 16-bit machine on par with like the Super Nintendo and some of the other 16-bit machines of the day. And so actually Becky Berger, the Becky Berger who did Bard's Tale 3 and Dragon Wars and all those games, has taken up the lead to port Nox Archaist to the 16-bit GS architecture and enhance it in the process, leveraging the 16-bit graphics and sound capabilities of the GS. So that's the only one in the works, because she volunteered to do it. That was the key, because I don't have experience in the 16-bit realm there either. So that's the answer to kind of what the future would like and what platforms would be involved.
All right, great. So, with that said, my final question for you, Mark, for tonight is: do you have anything you would like to say to the fans watching to end our little discussion on?
Thank you very much. I appreciate all of your interest and support. Without it, this project wouldn't have happened. It sustained me over the years. Every comment that's posted or email that I get with a comment or a question, I just really enjoy engaging with fans and players, and this game, and it's for you. It's also for me, and fulfilling that goal that I had as a kid and all that. But that would not have been enough. So thank you, because if it wasn't for you, this wouldn't have happened.
All right, sounds great. So, Mark, again, it was a pleasure hanging out with you this afternoon or slash evening now. And as I said at the start, definitely congratulations to you and the rest of the team for completing the game. As we've said over the last
Thank you.
about 2 hours, this was a passion project first and foremost. And it's always great to see these projects have a happy ending.
Well, absolutely. I'm absolutely thrilled that that is how it turned out. And thank you so much for having me, Josh. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you and to all the folks in the comments.
All right. Oh, I just have one quick shallow question for you. Are there any other retro RPGs or developers that are working on games that, if the fans who are watching or are liking Nox may want to check out, for other titles?
Sure, sure. In no particular order, Scald is definitely one I would recommend checking out. That's one actually is developed on modern hardware, made to look retro, but man, he did one incredible job. It basically looks like a Commodore 64 game. And that's also on my must play list. To your earlier question, it just hasn't been released yet. Um, so I definitely recommend checking that out when that is released. Realms of the Quest 5, if you're a Commodore fan, has been released, was actually released last year, either last year or earlier this year. That's kind of like a wizardry Bard's Tale style game, and he did Ghislaine is the developer. He did a really good job on that. I would recommend that. Um, and Lawless Legends. I want to give a shout out to Lawless Legends. Is another Apple II RPG in development. It is a old West, old American West themed RPG. It is in sort of the Bard's Tale style 3D view, but done with ray casting. Believe it or not, ray casting on an Apple II. They've done an incredible job with what they're doing on the technology and the story side. And I don't believe they've announced a specific release date, but my impressions from talking to them is it's going to be sometime in the coming year.
Awesome. So, with all that said, we will be wrapping things up here for tonight. For those of you who've been tuning in live, thank you so much for coming out. Definitely see there are a lot of fans for Nox as well as old school RPGs here in our chat. For those of you watching this recording, you will find links to the places Mark mentioned in the description down below. For anyone new watching, be sure to check out our Discord, and our Patreon link down below. I will be back later tonight for our regular game streams, and we have frequent game developer interviews here on the channel. So, with everything said, come back for daily discussions on game design here and on Game Wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games. And until next time, have a great evening, everybody. Take care.